Happy Friday, Secular Fam, and how is everyone today? What is everybody doing this weekend to either avoid our current hellscape or to change it? Please let us know in the chat. Make sure that you switch from host and panelist to everyone. Tomorrow I will be participating in a little town hall hosted by Shadow Rock Church and the Desert Progressives Indivisible Group. They are hosting a town hall. Tell me how you really feel from, I believe, 4 to 5:30 tomorrow. So there is, I think Eddie should be throwing a link in there. Next week, we're going to be talking with one of my favorite local journalists for an update on the Arizona State Legislature with the Copper Courier's Cameron Stevenson. But for today, we are speaking with Dan Barker. Now, he's got a really long bio, so I'm just going to try to cover the most important parts and maybe share a little story. But Dan Barker is the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a former evangelist who preached for 19 years. He became a teenage evangelist at age 15, received a degree in religion from Azusa Pacific University, and was ordained to the ministry by the Standard Community Church in California. He served as associate professor in 3 California churches: Arcadia Friends Church, a Quaker church, Glen Grove Assembly of God, Hacienda Heights, and Standard Christian Center, an independent charismatic church loosely affiliated with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ tradition. He maintained an ongoing touring musical ministry, including 8 years of full-time cross-country evangelism. Following 5 years of reading, Dan gradually outgrew his religious beliefs and announced his atheism publicly in 1984. He tells his story in the books Losing Faith in Faith and Godless. He regularly travels the country and the world, giving lectures, performing concerts, and participating in debates with theists, many at college and university campuses. And for myself, it would have been, I would say, probably the early 2000s. I'm trying to remember if it was pre or post 9/11. I think maybe it was a post 9/11 world at that point. And I had small children. I was going to the West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church in Glendale, Arizona. We were a small group that was renting out a multi-purpose room at a elementary school, and we didn't have a lot of money, and so they raised enough money to bring in Dan Barker, and there he was with his piano and sharing his story of being a preacher to an atheist. And I was immediately like, because I only went to church because of my kids. I thought I had to. And then after seeing you, I was like, oh, I don't have to go through this. I don't know if it was what the church wanted, but it's kind of what happened. So did I miss anything in your bio, Dan?
Oh, that's a good broad brush introduction. Thank you.
Well, I want to hear a little bit more about what you've been working on. If you want to fill in any gaps with your origin story, so to speak, or what you're really focused on these days, that would be great.
Well, I'll do that. So in 1983, I knew I was not a believer anymore after 19 years of preaching. I didn't aim for atheism. I didn't even use the word. I just sort of like, well, I guess that's what I am. And I hadn't knowingly met any others. And I kept preaching for a while. I was a really bad hypocrite for 4 or 5 months until December of that year when I just broke it off. And in January of '84, I wrote out a short letter to everybody, my family, my friends, my co-missionaries, the publishing companies. I was working with 3 different Christian publishing companies. I wrote Christian musicals, which are still selling actually today. I'm still getting royalties from those 1970 some musicals. And then in early 1984, just a few months after leaving, exiting the ministry, I found out about the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I wrote them a letter. I read Annie Laurie Gaylor's book about women. And so they invited me to write an article for the first volume of the newspaper, Freethought Today. And then in September, I was invited to Chicago by the producers of a show in Chicago called AM Chicago. The host was named Oprah Winfrey. And I didn't know much about Oprah Winfrey. She was just ready to go national. She was a big name in Chicago at that time, and also on the East Coast. And because Ann Gaylor, who was the founder and president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, had been invited, and Oprah's producer said, "Do you know anyone else who has a good story, who used to be a believer?" So they flew me out there. And that day was the first day I ever knowingly met any other atheist. I know we've all met atheists in our lives, but we just don't know it. So here I was, a few months before, I'd been preaching the gospel, and now I had never actually spoken about my change. I'd never talked publicly or anything. I just changed and left. So now here I was in Chicago on this show with Oprah Winfrey, a host, and she's asking, "So why did you change your mind, Dan?" And if you can see that video is actually online right now, still. And you can see me groping for the words and the phrases the first time in front of a live audience. And the audience was mostly Bible thumpers. The producers packed that audience there it was really good TV because there was a dynamic going on. So, and then I met Anne, and I met her daughter, Annie Laurie Gaylor, and Annie Laurie and I are now married. In fact, today is our 38th anniversary. We're going to celebrate tonight. But not only was that the first time I had publicly spoken about my loss of faith before anybody, and the first time I had ever met and known any actual out atheist, it was also the first time I'd ever spoken before a hostile audience. And I loved it. It was like, wow. You know, when you preach to a church congregation, you wonder, are they really there because or they have to be there, or they're with you, and you hope for some kind of a response, even an amen. Or in church, you never hear anybody go boo, or challenge you, because it's church. But here, what I was saying was making people mad, and then they were actually engaged, and I thought, this is cool. We're actually having a real conversation here. They don't like me, but this is, and I just loved that whole thing. So anyway, we showed a video of that Oprah Winfrey show to our daughter, Sabrina. Sabrina's 35 now. So a few years ago, we showed her that clip, and she was laughing, because not only was that the day that her parents met, we have a video of the day we met each other, but the audience, and also the 80s music and the 80s dress and all that stuff. So I said, well, I found a community here, and I love this, and this is great. 3 years later, I started working full time for the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And in 2004, Annie Laurie and I became co-presidents. After Anne retired, we became co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we have a national radio show. In fact, in June, in 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to record our 1,000th national radio show. It's called Freethought Radio since 2006. We've had a national TV show called Freethought Matters, and of course the newspaper. And since then, and since 1985, I've been doing a lot of debates. I just love getting in front, especially of a religious audience. There's just something exciting about that. And I've done to date 141 public, formal, moderated debates, mostly at universities, sometimes in churches and sometimes other venues, and on various topics. Mostly, does God exist? But sometimes the Bible, or the historicity of Jesus, or can you be good without God, or state-church separation. There's various topics that come up, and including 2 at Oxford, which were really fun. And Annie Laurie just did a debate last fall in Cambridge. She doesn't do a lot of debates, but they invited her to talk about is religion compatible with feminism, that kind of thing. It was a good talk, a good debate. So we've been doing this for 40 years now. And I also write. I just finished my 11th book, which just came out last fall, called Contraduction, which I want to talk about later when we have time to do that. But basically, that's my story. And if you want to know the details, why did I change? What was going through my mind? It's in those books that you mentioned, especially the book Godless. And the 4 or 5 year process of reading and reevaluating and moving across that religious spectrum to where I got to where I am today. And what happened after everybody got my letter, that was quite a story. So you can read it there in that book.
So I have a question for you because we are the land here of Charlie Kirk. Turning
Yeah.
Point USA is right here in Scottsdale. Right down the road from my house, actually, is Dream City Church, one of the many Dream City churches throughout the United States. Have you ever shared a debate stage with Charlie Kirk by any
I
chance?
I have not, but some people have said I should, and we should. That would be fun.
I think you should as well. So, obviously everything that's going on right now is unprecedented, but I think that you and others have been sounding the alarm on what could happen as the United States has kind of chipped away at that wall, separating religion and government. So, what do you think today is the most pressing issue facing secular Americans right now?
Well, the most impactful or damaging one, and besides the symbolic ones like Ten Commandments monuments and that, and nativity scenes on public property, is public money going into private voucher schools. I mean, that's draining public education. And that actually started in Wisconsin at a little pilot program, and now the this school voucher advocates are just expanding it, and many states are expanding it to the point where you just heard the Supreme Court let stand the Oklahoma's refusal to have the state fund a private religious charter school in that state, which, if that had been upheld, would have meant that all our public dollars could just go to actually religious teaching schools. And this Catholic school is making no secret of the fact we're going to train the students in Catholic doctrine, Catholic teaching, and they wanted public dollars to do that. So I think vouchers, as far as the actual material damage this caused, is probably the most pressing issue that we're facing on the state-church separation. Of course, there's all these other, prayer before school board meetings, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation has right now 10 full-time attorneys plus a legal staff. Plus, for the summer, we just welcomed 6 new legal interns, students that we've got their carol set up for them, and they're excited to be working. We take lawsuits. We just had 2 new lawsuits filed. One was in Massachusetts, Quincy, Massachusetts, where the mayor has spent almost $1 million to erect 2 huge Catholic statues at the entrance of the police headquarters for some reason. Catholic statues. And a whole bunch of people are upset, including a lot of religious people, like a lot of Protestants. And why are you doing this? Why are you spending my public tax dollars? So we filed suit there. And we are prepared with a coalition. We're waiting for the governor of Texas to sign the bill that just passed both houses to put the 10 Commandments in every public classroom. And the same thing, a very similar thing happened in Louisiana, and we are suing there, and we have won in Louisiana, and now that's on appeal in federal court. So, assuming the governor signs the law as he's promised to do, it could be today even, we're ready to drop a lawsuit. We've got it's the National ACLU, it's the ACLU of Texas, it's Americans United for separation of state and church, or church and state, and then Freedom from Religion Foundation. And the attorneys are ready. We've got the plaintiffs in place, so we're ready to go. And we like that. We like being able to move quickly. And sometimes speed is important. And right now, I think the huge mess that the country's in, especially because of Trump and the right wing and the Christian nationalists and all that, right now, as imperfect as it is and as unsteady as it is, the courts are our best defense right now, because Congress is no defense. Congress is not really going to do anything. They're pushing for Christian nationalism. So the courts, have been ruling almost consistently against these right-wing attacks, but the Supreme Court now has a huge conservative bent to it. And if Barrett had not recused herself from this Oklahoma case, that was what, a week ago, right? 10 days ago. There could have been a different outcome. So it's really hanging by a thread. But at least at the lower levels, the courts seem to be pretty strong about precedent. And right now, that's kind of all we've got, besides education and protest. I mean, protests go a long way. and educational efforts go a long way as well. So we're doing all we can to try to keep that a very important wall of separation, as Jefferson phrased it, the wall of separation between church and state.
Hmm. Well, and I mean, here in Arizona, you mentioned, the courts being our last kind of hope. Um, in the comments, actually, Diane Post, who is our legal director, when you mentioned 10 interns, she piped up here on the chat. Wouldn't she love to have 10 attorneys? And we are actually trying to secure a new legal director. So it's fantastic that you have all that, but you also brought up our ability to protest here in Arizona. We've now our Democratic governor has actually signed into law a bill that is so broadly written, like it could be interpreted that if I'm tabling at a school campus now, it could be seen as, as against the law, as an encampment, because it's written so broadly. So there are other states that are trying to ban protests now and kind of phrasing it as if it's to, combat anti-Semitic speech, but really it seems as though it's written to prohibit any kind of speech. Have you come across that in other states in your travels around the United States?
Yeah, well, look what's happening now. There's a section proposed in this reconciliation bill. I don't think it's in the current bill. It's been proposed for the administration to take away the tax exemption of any nonprofit group that it determines to be a terrorist organization. It's so vague and it's so broad, and all of the nonprofits in the country are worried. We could just be labeled, and there's no actual process for it. So our group or any nonprofit group, your group, if you're a nonprofit, they could say you said something in your newsletter that seems is terrorist. So we and a whole bunch of organizations and a lot of nonprofit attorneys are looking at all the options and the angles and what can happen if this happens. And that's a way to curtail free speech as well, if you can shut these groups down. Of course, you can continue to function, but you're less likely to raise money if you're not tax exempt. So we know that we have a lot of supporters who would continue to support even if we weren't tax exempt. Like you give money to political candidates, even though that's not tax exempt. But still, it would have a serious impact on our work on all the groups, the ACLU and Planned Parenthood, and any of these groups that are working and making statements that the government might consider to be un-American or even terrorists. So yeah.
Mhm. There's so many different legal battles that are going on right now. Could you maybe give us your top three of your biggest concerns of what is happening in our courts right now that you're really keeping an eye on?
Well, there's always the symbolic, and of course the Ten Commandments in Texas and Louisiana. That's what we're thinking about right now because we're ready to file. Uh, that on the one hand, you think, well, it's just symbolic. What's the harm, right? So there's a nativity scene at somebody's city hall, right? You can just ignore it, right? Although we think the government should not be taking a position or promoting religion. But with these cases, the Ten Commandments are going to be posted, mandated to be posted in the public schools. Every elementary and high school student in the state, every classroom would have to have this large Ten Commandments poster, the Protestant version, by the way, not the Catholic version. And of course, what do Hindus and what do Muslims think about that? In a state in Texas, for example, even though it's very religious, about 25% of Texans are not religious, and about a third of Texans are not Christian. It's only about 67% of Texans who are Christian, and yet they're going to force that on school children are required by law to be in those classes. They're being forced to see those Ten Commandments. And the sponsor of the bill in Texas said, well, regardless of what the Ten Commandments say, and regardless of how much we might obey them or not, those kids will see that and they will know that God is watching. And they think the fact that God is watching is going to make kids into little moral kids, because God is the fear of the judgment of the God is what's going to make us be good. That doesn't work actually in real life. Kids are going to be kids. They're going to, listen to their peers more, and then into their family. And the plaintiffs in these lawsuits that we're taking, and we're often joined by religious people, and there are a number of Christians and Catholics and Jewish plaintiffs who agree with us that when you mix religion and government, they both get dirty. The religion should be, the private family should have the freedom to direct the religious education of their kids without the government interfering with somebody else's religion pushed onto it. So even though it is symbolic, we think it's extremely important. And there's a good precedent. Almost 50 years ago, in the case Stone versus Graham, the Supreme Court ruled very clearly against the Ten Commandments in public schools. Noting that school children is a different case when it comes to the children who have to be there. And in that decision, they said the Ten Commandments are undeniably a religious document. And they're pretending, some of them are pretending, well, it's just history and morals, right? But it's a religious document.
And that brings up the argument that's used frequently, that we are a Christian nation, or we're founded on Christian principles. So, how do you argue, or how can maybe you help us argue with folks who use that false claim to say that we are a Christian nation and we're built on those morals?
Well, the first thing we can say, which is really simple, is that where does it say that? Where in our founding documents does it say anything about Christianity or Jesus? It doesn't anywhere. It's true that many of the founders were believers, were Christians, and it's true that many of them were guided by their Christian faith. And you can find in some of their writings, not all of them, but in some of their writings, you can find a strong, preference for their faith. But they didn't put it into any of our documents. In fact, they debated it. Some of them wanted Christianity, and they rejected that. They deliberately rejected that. And there was no mention at the Constitutional Convention of the Ten Commandments. That wasn't brought up at all. In fact, the story when Benjamin Franklin, as a very old man, suggested that they should have prayer. His motion was tabled. They didn't even vote on it. They didn't even want to vote on that. They had no official prayer at the Constitutional Convention, although I'm pretty sure many of them privately prayed, which is fine. That's what we're in favor of. People can privately pray, but it shouldn't be done by the government. So a good reply to that is to say, if we're a Christian nation, why doesn't it say so somewhere in our founding documents? And a lot of them will respond, well, those were the views of the founders, of many of the founders. That's true, but also many or most of the founders did not think women should vote. Many or most of them were slave owners. So are we supposed to go back and become carbon copies of all of the personal private views of our founders? Is that what we're supposed to do? Which some people in law, who are more originalist in their interpretation, think, yeah, we should go back to the country should be run by what they thought back then in their minds. So, and there was a movement in the 1890s to put God into the Constitution. And it's kind of like today even. And that movement was really strong more than a century ago, and it failed. Nobody wanted the God. We wanted freedom. We produced a document. If you look at the Constitution, it's godless. You can say that is a godless document. There's no God, there's no Jesus, there's no Christianity. And it does mention religion, but only to exclude it. There should be no religious test for public office. And of course, the First Amendment, it has the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. So basically, the Constitution is limiting the power of the government and giving we, the people, as much power as we can have individually and privately. And then, of course, there are a lot of fake quotes out there that the Christian right likes to put out that turns out to be bogus, but they still quote them. Like, like Washington saying, you can't govern without the Ten Commandments. Where do you find that? Where do you find that original quote anyway? So they are dishonest. People like David Barton, his wall builders organization, even he has admitted, well, yeah, some of those quotes were dishonest, but it was still the intention. They're just doggedly intent on and pushing their religion on the whole rest of the world.
Yeah, it's really shocking. When you see or when you hear people, because one of our areas of focus obviously is our state legislature, so I'll pay attention to what's happening in those committee hearings, and it's frequently pretty terrible. Same with school boards here, and that's just it. They hear these talking points, or they see maybe it's a tweet that Elon just keeps reposting and boosting up, but it becomes repeated. It's like Orwellian. The lie was repeated so much that everybody started to believe it, and that's really a scary place that we are right now, especially with ChatGPT and AI and with deep fake videos. I get so disgusted when I see these videos or images. Like, yeah, they might be kind of funny, but also, what are we doing here, people? It really kind of scares me. And the fact that so many people are so undereducated in the United States and throughout the world, really, to buy that kind of stuff. It's really alarming to me.
Is Juan Mendez still in the Congress?
Unfortunately, no. Juan, he had a primary, and unfortunately, he did not win his primary. And his wife, Athena, she now heads up the abortion access for all. So we were successful last cycle, and we were able to codify abortion access into our constitution through her leadership. But to do that, she ended up stepping down. We do, however, have two fantastic, get this, ordained ministers in our House of Representatives here in the state of Arizona. One is named Quante Cruz. She's an AME minister, and the other is Stephanie Stahl Hamilton, and she is a Presbyterian minister. During our but they always score 100% on our secular scorecard. And so
Wow.
during our secular day at the Capitol, because we are, trying to partner more with these more progressive, smaller congregation religious organizations, they introduced us at the legislature on the House floor, and all of the Freedom Caucus members, including two who are ordained ministers themselves, walked off of the floor as the secular Arizona crew was being introduced. So that's kind of where things are here in Arizona, if that helps you. Yeah.
Well, there's more and more secular elected officials now. There's that ASEO group, that the National Association of Secular Elected Officials, and of course the Freethought Caucus in DC, and um, the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, but we also started a separate 501c4 called the FFRF Action Fund, a different group which can do endorsements. And with their tracking, they're not just tracking at Congress and at the state level, they're also tracking it at the school board level, if you can imagine how many thousands of school boards there are around the country. And they're able to track who the members are, where they are. We have a scorecard as well. And so FFRF can't do much of that kind of political stuff, endorsing stuff, I mean. But the Action Fund is into that. And so you might also look at ffrf-action.org, is it? To be in track of that. And if you sign up as an advocate, they don't have members, so you don't join as a member. But if you sign up as an advocate, they will send you, by the way, did you know that this bill is happening in your area, or that this school board member is up for election in your area? They will give you a suggested wording for an email or a phone call that you can make to your elected representative. Phone calls are better, actually. They have to take them and they have to log them, and somebody's at least listening. But FFRF Action is getting really involved, and there's some great tools to be able to monitor and watch what's happening all over the country. State level is kind of crucial right now, and looking at Oklahoma, looking at Texas and Louisiana,
And
Arkansas.
Missouri. I mean, Missouri is their Supreme Court is now, or I don't know if it's the Supreme Court or the legislature, but they're essentially trying to overturn the will of the voters who approved abortion access for all in the state of Missouri, from my understanding, and now they're trying to reverse it.
Yeah, they don't care about democracy. You know, at its heart, Christian nationalism is necessarily, profoundly undemocratic. They talk about a king. He's the Lord, he's the master, he's the king. And they want to use democracy to destroy democracy, because in democracy, you're not going to have, you know, that Christian nationalist control. They really don't. They disvalue democracy. To them, that's an evil. And you can see how a lot on the right are trying to hamper voting, because they don't want vote. They want top-down control. They want their God, their Lord, their 10 commandments on every classroom, their ideas imposed on all of the rest of us. Ironically, as the country is becoming less and less religious, which I think that's kind of telling, because they are really scared. They see what's happening. And I think in the long run, there's, of course, right now, there's a lot of damage that's going to be done, and has been done. In the long run, they're dying out, and they know it, and they feel it, and they see it, and it angers them. They're kind of like a wounded animal out in the forest. They're dying, but they want to take down everything they can with it. They're so angry. They're so upset that the evil, secular, liberal world is taking away their freedoms to discriminate and to bully others. So we have a lot of work to do, but it is kind of encouraging to see that how afraid they are. They really are fearful people. They really can't stand diversity. They can't stand, you know, equity. They can't stand any, they even want to get rid of DEI. They want to get rid, they want to get rid of all the outsiders. They want our white Christian America to be like like they imagine it used to be back in the beautiful past. But so we have work to do. And one of my mottos is purpose in life comes from solving problems, or trying to solve problems. That's where we have a purposeful life. You identify a problem, you attack it, whatever it is. It could be illness or war, inequality, you know, it could be unfairness, it can be disasters, it can, you know, attack it and try to solve it. So if meaning in life comes from solving problems, we have a very meaningful few years ahead of us here, because there's a lot of problems to be working on. And maybe that sounds overly optimistic, but what else are we going to do? We're not going to sit back and just let them win.
No, I love that. I'm writing it down actually, because doing this work, doing this kind of advocacy work is really exhausting sometimes. And so, because I've been so stressed out and feeling burnt out, and I go up and down between fight, flight, and freeze ever since November, I would say. So some people have asked, I always say, I need to quit. This is too stressful. I can't do it. And my friends will say, are you going to stop paying attention to everything when you quit? And I was like, well, no. So it doesn't really make sense. What I am going to do though is in June, I'm actually taking a proper vacation. So hopefully that will make me more equipped to solve problems and find meaning in my life. Um, we've gotten a lot of things happening here in the state of Arizona. And I imagine, with the work that you're doing in Texas, can you elaborate more? Because you talked about how you're partnering with ACLU in Texas. What other, local or state organizations like ours do you partner with? Or does it depend on the case that's come up or the urgency? How does that work?
Well, so it's always ad hoc. Uh, we don't have any, like contractual formal agreements with the other groups, but all of the groups who work on these issues, we all know each other, and so they do conference. I know our attorneys are always conferencing with the attorneys of the other groups, and part of that is to avoid duplicating efforts. Part of that is to coordinate, like if we have a campaign of writing amicus briefs on a certain case, like a Supreme Court case or an appeals court, then let's make sure our amicus isn't the same as yours. We'll focus on this, you focus on jurisdiction, we'll focus on standing, you focus on the merit, and you focus on history. And then, so that's really cool. We can hit the court from the different groups with more of a coordinated strategy. And then as cases come up, and our legal director, Patrick Elliott, he's always talking with all the other leaders, national and regional ones, because when you file in a state, you want the local, first of all, you need local counsel, you need attorneys in your state, but like in Texas, we're working with the ACLU of Texas as well as the national ACLU. And the local ACLUs don't necessarily have to agree with the national. Sometimes they even disagree. There have been cases where the ACLU is on different sides of the same argument. So there's, they have different opinions. But um, ever since a case in Ohio we did about 12 years ago, uh, we've been very happy to coordinate with the local ACLUs and other groups. In Oklahoma, there's like 4 groups that we're working with on a coalition there. And the plaintiffs, it's good because all of these groups can come up with their own plaintiffs. We have members in Austin, Texas, and we have members in Phoenix who know about us, and so they'll volunteer to be a plaintiff. But other groups have members too. And they could be even religious groups, like you were mentioning, some of these churches who are very good on these issues would say, well, we have members who would want to also join as plaintiffs. So it's kind of fun to see it all happen. And it's not formalized. Uh, all of the attorneys and all the groups, they know the wind, how the wind's blowing. They all know what's on the docket. And they know what's coming up. And so they're talking about, well, what can we do? And we're individual groups, so we have to kind of protect our autonomy, obviously. But the membership in our groups isn't discrete. We have members who join all the groups. So, it's not like you can count them all up, because we have members who join like 8 different or 10 different groups because they want to get the literature and so we share membership, we share ideas. And in Arizona, I suppose if an issue came up in Arizona, we would call somebody like you, or we have a list, of course, of local attorneys
Oh
that,
yeah, like our legal director Diane Post, I know has reached
yeah,
out to your legal folks here and there.
yeah.
We've got this woman in Peoria, Arizona, who had insisted on reading scripture to open up all of her board meetings, but she's
Oh, I
since
remember that. Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. I remember that one.
yeah, she's promised that she's going to do it again. She also falsely claimed that she won her case, even though she lost her case.
Oh,
And she hasn't started up again. They just had a meeting last night, and I watched the whole darn thing, all 6 hours of it. So,
oh no.
so yeah. Are you finding that you are partnering more with like religious people or people who consider themselves faithful in one way or another? Do you track the demographics of your membership? Because we're finding that there's a lot of people who still, go to church or, adhere to some sort of religious text who are reaching out to us more and more because they still believe in secular government. Is that the
Yeah.
case with you all?
Yeah, it is more and more in the last 20, 30 years now. Um, and it's the issues that matter. And here in our town, for example, there's a lot of churchgoers, believers, but we're all marching in the same parades. You know what I mean? We're like, this issue is so important. And so, yeah, and in fact, it helps our lawsuits if we can show that it's not just angry atheist, it's people who really care. And we've often had like 20 plaintiffs representing Jews and Wiccans and Catholics and Protestants and others. And it shows the court there's a broad support, or there's a broad objection to mixing government and religion. So, my whole attitude is people should be judged by their actions, not their beliefs. And who cares what they believe? If they want to, if they want to stand on their head and pray to Mother Goose, what do I care? As long as their actions in the real world are making a real difference, then we work with them, and we're glad to. In fact, we had a local minister who got criticized by the churches because he joined our lawsuit. The state of Wisconsin was trying to establish what they set up an office to hire a preacher to establish statewide standards for marriage, which was code for no gay marriage, right? And this pastor was doing gay marriages, so he joined our lawsuit as a local pastor. We had a good time with him, and on all the social issues, we pretty much agreed. We didn't agree philosophically or theologically, but we didn't have to. And he got a lot of flack for that. But we won the case, by the way. The attorney general advised the attorney not to take the case, and the governor ignored the attorney general and hired outside counsel, this right-wing Christian group, and we were all deposed. Anyway, it was like a circus, really. But in Oklahoma, we're part of a coalition that involves a lot of religious people and non-religious as well, on a number of issues. And part of our legal strategy, a big part of FFRF's legal strategy, is try to put out these fires before going to court, because court is expensive, right, and time consuming. And so we write thousands of letters. We have dozens of templates of different issues, and one of our members will contact us from Maryland or from Idaho that you won't believe what they're doing. Oh, yes, we would. And we've already got a letter ready. We just have to put in the names, you know what I mean? So we send out to Oklahoma schools, we've been sending out just dozens and dozens of letters to school districts. And in some of the cases, which is nice, at least 20% of the time, we win the case. They stop doing it just because of a letter, a legal letter, just informing them that this is wrong. And sometimes they even thank us. We didn't know this was wrong. Well, we've been pretty successful in Oklahoma, and the superintendent of public instruction there, Ryan Walters, is really mad at us because we told the school that they should stop reading the Bible and praying over the students during the school hours, and the school agreed with us. Said, "You're right, we shouldn't do this." He got mad because he thinks they should be doing that. And so we've been successful in stopping. Now he has turned around, he's suing us. The superintendent of public instruction in Oklahoma is suing the Freedom from Religion Foundation for interfering with his freedom to direct the education of the schools, right? And of course, it looks like a frivolous lawsuit. It's giving us a lot of publicity, by the way. And in fact, some of the other national groups wish they could be sued too, because it's a sign that what we're doing is working, that they would be so mad that he would have to sue us. So, and what we're saying is we're not telling those schools what to do. We're just informing them of what the law is. We're sending them a letter. You're violating the law. You should stop doing it. And then if they stop doing it, we have no authority in the state of Oklahoma to mandate, you know what I mean? And in fact, a lot of the school districts have their own local authority. And in fact, the superintendent doesn't have any authority to tell them what to do either. And yet he thinks he does. He wants to bring the Bible. You know, he wanted to buy these Trump Bibles to put in every school. He's that really right-wing religious nut. So in your case, you won't always have to go to court. Just writing a strongly worded letter can sometimes be very effective.
Well, and I don't. Our legal director, Diane Post, she works tirelessly. She's lucky if she has one intern, and she fires off probably. She said it here in the chat. Probably every 2 years, I would say we send off about 300 because that's how many school districts there are in Arizona. And when we do that quite frequently, some of the, folks who receive these letters are like, "Oh shoot, no, we don't want to break the law. Let's stop doing that invocation that we've started doing." Or like every year in August, she probably gets a half a dozen emails of parents saying, "Hey, my kid's teacher is trying to force him to say the pledge. Can you help me out?" Sorts through her templates, bam, bam, here you go. So it's very important. And you're right. So it doesn't always have to go to a court case, as long as you can just impart some wisdom onto people. Now, what we are finding in Arizona is that now it seems that many of these school districts or city councils or whatever have become emboldened, right? Because they see what's happening at the national level. They're like, "Okay, go ahead. What are you going to do? Nothing's going to happen to me." Are you experiencing that kind of, just dismissal of your letters in the same regard?
Yeah, usually they do. You do dismiss it or ignore it, or once in a while, they take us seriously, but we don't hear about it. It'd be like a year later, somebody will say, "Hey, they stopped praying at graduation," so you don't know. But yeah, and a lot of them, of course, want to be sued. A lot of them are saying, "Bring it on, so we can go to the Supreme Court." We have a different Supreme Court now, and now after the Kennedy decision, we now know they're going to rule in our favor. So go ahead and sue us. We can lose at the state level. We can lose at the, even at the appeals level. They imagine the Supreme Court's now going to bless them. They're going to be able to get away with what previously has been unconstitutional and illegal. On the other hand, it's expensive. They have to hire their attorneys. They have to go through this whole thing. And we have won cases where, like in California, Chino Hills, they were having religion at the school board meetings with students present, and we took a court and we won that case, and they were forced to stop, and they had to pay, I don't know, 400,000 or something like that in a district that's really strapped for cash. And so we mentioned that in Ohio when we sued over the Jesus painting in the high school. That was a fun case because the principal said that picture's not coming down without a court order. So we got a court order and it came down, and they had to pay, I don't know, $300,000, and that was publicly known. And so what our attorneys can do is they can point to that case and show, hey, look, we sued, we won, the school district had to pay this, and we sued and we won over that same issue that's happening in your school. And do you want to have to fight a losing fight and spend? Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're so emboldened, they say, we're gonna waste taxpayer money on this because Jesus is more important than anything. Sometimes they do that. But sometimes the practical ones will say, even if they disagree with us, sometimes they will say, well, I think we're right and we think FFRF is wrong, but we can't afford this and we can't afford the risk. So they can publicly save face by saying, I think that Jesus poster should have stayed there, but we're kind of forced by the realities. And that's okay. We don't care. We think it's glad they could save face as long as the right thing is being done. So
Yeah, and I agree that there are some, I mean, as far as I can tell, at least, I was in a past life, I was on my school board, local school board for 8 years. And so, you know, in Arizona, there's three responsibilities basically is hiring a superintendent, student achievement and safety, and good stewardship of taxpayer dollars. And, you know, first, I'm not seeing a lot of those. There, you know, there's in Arizona, we've had more superintendents resign, retire, or lose their jobs since the 2022 election. We've seen these radical extremists on school boards costing districts hundreds of thousands of dollars with broken contracts and severance packages. You know, these frivolous lawsuits or public records requests that they're totally coaching people on here's how you really gum up your local district and cost them a ton of money. If for many of these people, I guess what I'm saying is that it seems to be their end game to fully bankrupt their local schools.
and what do they care? I mean, really, if it's tax dollars, you know.
Yeah, out of
So
one side.
you were a secular elected official then.
Well, I didn't even really, I don't even know if the organization existed from 2012 to 2020, but I wasn't even really thinking about it then, but I
Yeah.
never really said the pledge.
Yeah.
So there was that.
There's a lot more like that around the country, and a lot of them are being more bold to actually come out about it. And some of them, our action fund has every week a secularist of the week and a theocrat of the week. They pick somebody, and you can go on the webpage and see who it is. And often it's a religious person on a school board or a county board objecting to the prayer or something. And so they make, in fact, in Texas, Talarico is a member of the Congress there. He's a devout church-going Christian, but he objects to the Ten Commandments, and so he became the Action Fund's secularist of the week as a devout Christian, objecting to other Christians trying to push religion. So you don't have to be an atheist agnostic to become the secularist of the week. There's a lot of religious people who we would call secularists, at least on the principle of the Constitution.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, and I think the word secular, we've talked about this in our organization, can sometimes be a bit of a speed bump. People don't really know what it means.
Yeah,
Or for those who are raised in an evangelical setting, for them, I mean, secular essentially means evil,
yeah,
right? So there's already kind of an impediment when it comes to explaining the work that we do. And no, you can believe in whatever you want to. We just want to keep it in separate buildings. That's what we would like
yeah,
to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to preach that it was evil, so it's my fault.
Well, we
I
won't
preached in Arizona years ago too. I remember that.
well,
Uh,
we won't hold it against you.
Manuel Bonilla, who was the leading Spanish-speaking Christian recording artist for decades, lived in Arizona. So I spent a lot of time there, and I was his producer and arranger for a lot of years. And then my parents lived in Apache Junction for
Oh,
about 20 years, out there by the Superstition Mountains. So
oh, okay.
we would visit often.
Okay, right on. Well, that's It's beautiful the further east you get, and the Superstition Mountains are just lovely, and there's so much hiking around there. That's
The
great.
Peralta Trail going up
Hmm.
that. That's
Hmm.
really, and what was it called? Weaver's Needle, I think, that big that thing there. And then Steve Benson, do you remember Steve
Oh
Benson?
yeah, the cartoonist. Yeah.
Last year he had a stroke. I don't know if you know that. And he's in pretty bad shape, and he seems to be not recovering. And all those decades of brilliant work and creativity. He had to do daily cartoons a week, 5 of them, at the Arizona Republic. And he and I had a show that we used to do called Tunes and Tunes, where it was his cartoons and my tunes. So it was music and art, and we had a really fun show for years. So we spent a lot of time there. In he lives in Gilbert, but it's really sad. He's in this long-term care thing, and
Oh, that's a shame.
we were hoping, and his wife is hoping that maybe it's a temporary thing, but it looks like it's not. So
That's a
it's
shame.
sad.
There's another cartoonist here named David Fitzsimmons. He's in the Tucson
Yeah.
area. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's also a staunch, I don't know if he's humanist, agnostic, or atheist, but he's a big supporter of ours and just a wonderful columnist as well. So if you're not familiar with David
Yeah,
Fitzsimmons,
yeah, we see his work. Yeah.
oh, good,
I
good,
think we
yeah.
reprint it in our newspaper from time to time. So
Oh, great. And he's also got a Substack too, so you should check
yeah.
him out for sure. There's somebody here in the audience who is asking about a large group of faith-affirming people called Faithful America. Has FFRF ever worked with Faithful America?
Uh, yes. I don't know the specifics, but we have a show. What was the woman? We just had one recently. We have a show every week called Ask an Atheist, and I'm pretty sure their leader was on that. I wasn't hosting that show. Do you remember their president's name? She was good. She was amazing, and
I
she was
do
just
not
as an
remember.
open believer. And yeah, I forget her name. But yeah, we know about them.
And I just had to point out, because you talked about how you have a secularist of the week, Diane Post, our legal director, last month, I think it was,
Yeah,
because she was able to, along with the citizens in Vale, which is a community, I think, south of the Tucson area, fairly affluent community, and the board had kind of quietly approved the building of a Mormon temple there, that the Mormons would pay for and lease back at a discounted rate and blah blah blah. The citizens of this Vale Unified School District got a hold of that, gave us a call, and within a couple weeks, they scrapped the entire idea.
yeah,
So,
I remember that. Yeah,
yep.
yeah,
And
I
again,
remember.
it was because of people who are paying attention. So, I mean, I'm going to use that as an opportunity here on this call to let everybody know if there is something happening in your community where somebody is forcing prayer on students or posting the Ten Commandments in their classroom, by all means, please let us know, because without that information coming from those people in Vale, it would have just happened. Nobody would have ever known about it,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah,
Really
yeah. That's
important.
that's really important, and
Hmm.
and your group and our group needs to hear about it too. So people need to speak up.
Absolutely. So let's see. I had another question. Let me see if I can actually remember it. So, what do you think is the most effective way for secular Americans to engage politically? Would you say it's like local activism, litigation, national level advocacy? What should people be doing who are in our shoes, who are looking around and very concerned?
Yes, all of the above, I think, because they're all effective if you stay at it. But a personal contact, I think, for legislator or your mayor or your school board president to hear from you personally in some way. And emails are nice, but the staff who looks at the emails can sort of ignore them, and they may not actually get to the person. I know in Congress they have to log all of that, but a phone call is really just a quick phone call on a certain bill or a certain issue, calling them up, at least contacting them and letting them know that a person like you, a constituent especially, and even if you're not a constituent, you can still say, hey, I heard about this, and I would hope, this it's going to affect all of us in some way or other. So, like at Congress, you can call a member of a committee who's not your representative, but you know that that bill is going to affect where you live. So you can at least say that. say, I'm concerned about this because what you're voting on is going to affect me, even though I'm not your direct constituent. So, but if it's a direct constituent, you have every right to just march right into their office. They represent you. So, and the
Yeah, I've heard
Secular
this.
Coalition for America has an annual lobby day, they call it, where you can actually go out to DC and actually spend a day contacting members of Congress, which is really fun.
Yeah, and in Arizona we do a secular day at the Capitol too. So, if folks on this call aren't already members, I encourage you to become a member. Because we do have events. We are working on our next, we started a Logger with a Lawyer event. We wanted to have a fundraiser since Diane is leaving. We wanted to start fundraising for bringing in, a new legal director. And so the first one was her, and she's a civil rights and human rights attorney, and then Bob McWhorter, who's a constitutional attorney. We went to a local pub and we just talked about what's happening at the national level. Next one, we're hoping to have it sometime in July. And because of everything that's happening right now with unmasked or masked ICE agents abducting people in broad daylight, we hope to talk about what's happening in the world of
Yeah.
immigration. So
Uh,
keep your eyes peeled for that. Um, so we only have about 4 minutes left, and I want to honor your time as well as everybody else on this call. And I always try to end with one question. Oh, wait, hold on. I just saw that there's somebody with a question, and I apologize that I didn't see it. What does Dan think about the Pledge of Allegiance? Obviously, the God part is bad, but also indivisible, liberty and justice for all, and pledging to a flag. Isn't that something fascists do? Diane wants to know.
yeah. It's funny. Our country is not a piece of cloth, and why are we pledging to a piece of cloth? I learned the Pledge of Allegiance in 1954 in kindergarten, and it was the original one. One nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Then, of course, Congress passed the law to put under God in. And so when I went to first grade, I was really confused. I went to first grade at a public school, and I had to relearn it. And the way you first learn something seems to be the right way. And it's strange that now this under God is dividing what's indivisible. That went back to basically after the Civil War, so that our nation would be indivisible. We would be a nation of states, is what it had it referred to. So those are great concepts. Pledging to them, right now, no student has to say it. Even if a school directs it, no student has to say it. In fact, there's so many brave students who don't. They just stay seated. And there have even been some lawsuits over that as well, and some challenges. So, so yeah, I mean, I don't do it. I feel really weird. I don't know if fascistic is the right word, but I just feel really groupthinkish or something like, oh, we're all going to do this. Let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and pray. It just feels weird to me. Other people like that, and they think it's a sign of patriotism, and I guess that's what it means to have a free country. We can all have different feelings about that.
Hmm. Well, and I think too, like I love Christmas carols. I was in choir. I love Christmas carols. I don't care if they're religious or not, it's fine for me. But like I don't particularly believe what I'm singing. I just think the songs are really pretty. So you
I
can
like about half of them. The other half are kind of syrupy, weird. If there was great music, you would hear it all year round, right? But
yeah.
here it's just sort of expected. But yeah, how about half of them I think are nice. And some of
Mhm.
them were written by non-believers, and I like knowing that.
That's
White
always
Christmas,
the fun part.
White Christmas was written by an agnostic humanist, Irving Berlin.
Right. Yeah.
So
Eddie's our development director is Jewish, and he says, as a Jew, I think it's funny how many Christmas songs we have written.
yeah. Yeah, and Irving Berlin said he hated Christmas. He even told his daughter, partly because they lost a baby on Christmas Day, but uh, they were non-observant Jews. He didn't know anything about Judaism either. But people think since he came from a Jewish family, he must be Jewish in some way. But um, White Christmas says nothing about Jesus or any of that. It's just all about the holiday, the trees, and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
then what's that song? "Baby, It's Cold Outside" by
that one's a little bit predatory. Yep, absolutely.
yeah, kind of weird, um, but yeah.
little lesson on consent. So in these dark times, and so I'm so excited. We may have even broken a record today for attendees for our Friday discussion. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. We are a small but mighty nonprofit, so having somebody like you come and speak to us, it really means a lot to us. But I try to ask the same question every week. So Dan Barker, in these dark times, what gives you hope?
Well, history, I think we can see what has happened with protests and mass movements in the past with, I hate to use the word revolution because we still have a country, right? But I think history gives me hope that things were horrible for decades and yet they were overcome. You look at different countries of the world. So, um, and I think you can use hope in a secular way, in a non-religious way, as long as you know there's something in place for you to work on. Then, and even if you know you're going to lose, Sonia Sotomayor just wrote an interesting, was it a dissent, I think,
Mhm.
saying it's important to take some of these cases even when you know you're going to lose, because you need to speak up and you need to to be counted. And once in a while, we'll take a lawsuit that we think there's a good chance we won't win it, and we're not thinking in these practical, profit and loss terms. We're thinking about educating. So even with a losing lawsuit, you're educating the public. At least you're letting people know who you are, what you stand for, and what you're going for. We do actually win most of our cases, and the ones that we lose, mostly we lose on standing, not on the merits. So we have a good track record. But I think I have hope that at least we have a system in place that's clunking along that we can make some progress in.
Right on. Well, history also gives me hope.
Huh.
I listen to a lot of history podcasts, and Behind the Bastards these days has been the one I listen to the most to be reminded that this is not the first time that our country has come this close to fascism. So thank you so much, Dan Barker. So many kudos, like I said in our chat here. I appreciate you. And one of our board members, Mary Ganapole, says that she will see you in Tennessee.
Oh, in Tennessee, great. That'll be fun.
Right on. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope that you have a great weekend. Take care.